My ex-husband left me for a rich woman. Said I'd never amount to anything. 3 years later, she invited him to my company's annual gala as her date. She went pale when she realized whose name was on the building. Her entire family worked for me. His smirk vanished when I introduced myself as their boss. I never imagined I'd be signing divorce papers and inheriting a fortune in the same month. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Whitmore and Associates, my trembling hand hovering over documents that would officially end my marriage to Clark Thatcher. Hold on just a moment. Drop a comment letting us know what part of the world you're watching from. And if this tale has captured your attention, hit that subscribe button now, because what I have lined up for tomorrow's episode will absolutely blow your mind. 3 weeks earlier, my beloved mother Margaret had passed away, leaving me not just heartbroken, but unknowingly wealthy beyond imagination. Clark had delivered his devastating news with the clinical precision of a surgeon. "Elise, I want a divorce." The words echoed through our modest apartment kitchen, where I'd been preparing his favorite lasagna, hoping to lift his spirits after another rejected promotion at his accounting firm. "I've been thinking about this for months." "We're going nowhere together." I'd frozen, the wooden spoon still in my hand. "Clark, what are you talking about?" "We've been planning the renovation, talking about starting a family." "That's just it." His voice carried that patronizing tone I'd grown to recognize when he felt intellectually superior. "You're content with this mediocre life. Working at that little bookstore, living in this cramped place, dreaming small dreams. I need someone who matches my ambitions." The bookstore, Abernathy and Cubber's literary haven, had been my sanctuary for 5 years. A cozy corner shop where I'd worked my way up to assistant manager. Clark had always dismissed it as playing with books, never understanding the deep satisfaction I found in connecting readers with stories that would change their lives. "I've met someone else," he continued, his announcement delivered with the same emotionless efficiency he used for tax calculations. "Catherine Lively. Her family owns several businesses downtown. She understands success. Real success." The betrayal wasn't just in his decision to leave, but in how methodically he'd planned it. While I'd been caring for my dying mother during her final months, driving 3 hours each way to the hospice, Clark had been cultivating a relationship with someone he deemed more worthy of his future. She's sophisticated, Elise, cultured. Her family moves in circles that could actually help my career. He'd already packed 2 suitcases, already chosen which furniture he'd claim, already consulted Catherine's family lawyer about the cleanest way to dissolve our 3-year marriage. I remembered standing there in my flour-dusted apron, feeling like everything solid in my world was crumbling. "So you're leaving me for her money?" "I'm leaving you for a future with potential." Clark's correction was swift and sharp. "Catherine and I share the same vision for success. You're content being small, Elise. I'm not." That night, after Clark moved out with brutal efficiency, I'd sat surrounded by half-packed boxes and the overwhelming silence of abandonment. The grief of losing my mother collided with the shock of my marriage's implosion, leaving me emotionally decimated. The reading of my mother's will 2 weeks later had been another surreal experience. I'd expected perhaps a few pieces of jewelry, maybe enough money to cover the funeral expenses I'd been dreading. Instead, the family attorney had slid a folder across his desk with the gravity of someone delivering state secrets. "Miss Abernathy," he'd said, using my maiden name with deliberate formality, "your mother was quite specific about timing. These documents were sealed until after your divorce proceedings began." My mother had been Margaret Abernathy, not the retired schoolteacher I'd believed, but Margaret Abernathy, founder and primary shareholder of Abernathy Industries, a manufacturing empire she'd built from nothing over 30 years. She'd hidden her wealth behind trusts and corporate structures, living modestly by choice while building a legacy she'd always intended for me. "The total value of your inheritance," the lawyer continued, "including the primary manufacturing facilities, 3 subsidiary companies, commercial real estate holdings, and liquid assets, is approximately $47 million. I'd stared at the documents, unable to process the numbers. While Clark had been planning his escape to what he thought was greater wealth, I'd been unknowingly inheriting an empire. The cruelest irony revealed itself in the final pages of the corporate roster. Lively Construction, owned by Catherine's father, Francis Lively, had been seeking new contracts with Abernathy Industries for months, hoping to expand beyond their current small-scale projects. They weren't the established contractors I'd initially thought, but ambitious newcomers eager to prove themselves to bigger clients. Catherine's family wasn't wealthy. They were aspiring to wealth by securing contracts with companies like the one I'd just inherited. As I signed the divorce papers that afternoon, officially becoming Elise Abernathy once again, I felt the first stirrings of something that had been dormant during the chaos of loss and betrayal. Not anger, exactly, but a quiet determination to honor what my mother had built and discover who I truly was beneath the small dreams Clark had accused me of harboring. That evening, I stood in my empty apartment, no longer seeing a symbol of mediocrity, but a launching pad for something Clark would never see coming. The first month after the divorce felt like learning to breathe underwater. Every morning, I'd wake up reaching for someone who was no longer there, the absence hitting me fresh each time. The apartment that had once felt cozy now seemed cavernous, filled with echoes of a life that no longer existed. My job at Abernathy and Kerber Literary Haven became my only anchor to normalcy. The familiar routine of opening the store, arranging displays, and helping customers find their next literary escape provided structure when everything else felt chaotic. But even there, Clark's dismissive words haunted me. Playing with books, he'd called it, and now I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he'd been right. "You've been staring at that inventory sheet for 20 minutes, observed Penelope Hutch, the store's owner and my boss. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Want to talk about it?" I'd confided in Penelope about the divorce, but not about the inheritance. The weight of that secret felt too enormous to share with anyone yet. "Just trying to focus on work," I replied, forcing myself to actually read the numbers on the page. "Focusing is one thing. Hiding is another." Penelope settled into the chair beside my desk with the deliberate movements of someone preparing for a serious conversation. "I've been watching you these past few weeks. You're going through the motions, but you're not really here." She was right. I'd been sleepwalking through my days, mechanically performing tasks while my mind wrestled with questions I couldn't answer. Who was I without Clark? What did I want from life when no one else was defining my dreams for me? The inheritance documents sat untouched in my apartment, too overwhelming to process. $47 million might as well have been $47 billion for how real it seemed. Meanwhile, my modest salary barely covered rent and groceries. The disconnect between my current reality and my newfound wealth felt surreal. "I keep thinking about something my ex-husband said," I admitted to Penelope. "That I'm content being small. That I don't have real ambitions." Penelope's laugh was sharp and unexpected. "That man clearly never saw you reorganize our entire children's section or negotiate with that difficult publisher from New York. Small people don't fight for a 15% discount on 1,000 book. Order." Her words sparked something I'd forgotten about myself. I had fought for that discount, spending hours researching comparable prices and crafting a proposal that saved the store significant money. I'd also designed the new layout that increased our sales by 30%. And I'd personally built relationships with local schools that brought in steady revenue through bulk orders. "Maybe," I said slowly. "I've been thinking about ambition all wrong." That evening, I finally opened the inheritance documents again, this time with a different perspective. Instead of seeing overwhelming numbers, I tried to understand what my mother had actually built. Abernathy Industries wasn't just a manufacturing company. It was an ecosystem of interconnected businesses that provided jobs for hundreds of people. The more I read, the more impressed I became with my mother's vision. She'd started with a small textile operation and gradually expanded into construction materials, industrial equipment, and commercial real estate. Each acquisition had been strategic, building upon existing strengths while diversifying risk. But what struck me most was a handwritten note tucked between the corporate bylaws. "Elise, I built this not for the money, but for the impact. Every decision I made was about creating something lasting, something that would matter beyond my own lifetime. Creating and bringing this narrative to life required countless hours of dedicated work. So if you're enjoying shocking real-life stories, subscribe now. Your support truly makes all the difference. Now, let's continue with our story. I kept it secret because I wanted you to discover your own strength first. Now you have both. Use them wisely. Mom? I sat in my kitchen crying for the first time since the funeral. Not from grief this time, but from a mixture of gratitude and determination. My mother had seen something in me that I'd never recognized in myself. The next morning, I called the law firm to schedule a meeting about assuming control of the company. The lawyer, Peter Dober, seemed surprised by my decisiveness. Most inheritors take months to decide about active involvement, he noted during our phone call. Are you certain you want to take on this responsibility immediately? I want to understand what my mother built, I replied. I can't honor her legacy from a distance. My first visit to the Abernathy Industries headquarters was humbling. The building was sleek and modern, bustling with employees who had no idea their new owner had been working at a bookstore just weeks earlier. As I walked through the corridors with Peter, I felt simultaneously proud of what my mother had accomplished and terrified of the responsibility now resting on my shoulders. The management team has been running day-to-day operations efficiently, Peter explained as we entered the executive conference room. Your mother set up excellent systems, but major decisions have been delayed pending your involvement. I spent the entire day in meetings with department heads, learning about ongoing projects, reviewing financial reports, and trying to absorb 30 years of business development in a few hours. It was overwhelming but also exhilarating in a way I hadn't expected. Among the pending proposals was a bid from Lively Construction for a small office renovation project. Their submission was professional, but unremarkable, the kind of contract my company typically awarded to established firms with proven track records. Francis Lively's proposal revealed a company hungry for opportunities to prove themselves to bigger clients. That evening, I gave Penelope my 2 weeks' notice at the bookstore. I knew this day would come, she said with a sad smile. I could see you outgrowing us even if you couldn't see it yourself. I'll miss this place, I told her honestly. You taught me more about business than you realize. And you taught me that sometimes the quiet ones are just gathering strength, she replied. Whatever you're moving on to, they're lucky to have you. As I drove home that night, I realized Clark had been wrong about my ambitions. I wasn't content being small. I'd simply been waiting for the right opportunity to discover how large I could become. My transition from bookstore employee to corporate executive was like learning to speak a new language while everyone expected fluency. The first weeks at Abernathy Industries taught me that inheriting a fortune and actually managing it were entirely different challenges. Mrs. Thatcher, my assistant Meredith, began during my second day, then caught herself. I'm sorry, Ms. Abernathy. I have the quarterly reports you requested. The name correction felt symbolic. Every time someone used my maiden name, I felt a little more distance from the woman who had accepted Clark's limited vision of my potential. Elise Abernathy was someone I was still discovering, but she felt stronger than Elise Thatcher had ever been. The reports revealed both opportunities and problems. While the company was profitable, several long-term contracts were up for renewal, and 2 major clients had expressed concerns about continuity of leadership following my mother's death. I realized that proving myself wasn't just about personal growth, it was about protecting the livelihoods of everyone who depended on Abernathy Industries. I threw myself into understanding every aspect of the business. Mornings were spent in the manufacturing facilities, learning how our industrial equipment operated. Afternoons meant meetings with department heads, reviewing everything from supply chain logistics to employee benefits. Evenings were dedicated to studying financial statements and industry reports until my eyes burned. Luke Abernathy, my mother's longtime general manager and no relation despite the shared surname, became my unofficial mentor. He was a man in his 50s who had worked alongside my mother for 15 years and seemed genuinely invested in my success. Your mother never made a decision. Without visiting the factory floor first, he told me during my first tour of the main facility, she believed you couldn't lead people whose work you didn't understand. I spent an entire day working alongside the manufacturing teams, my business attire replaced with safety gear and steel-toed boots. The employees were initially skeptical of their new boss learning to operate machinery, but their attitudes shifted when they realized I was genuinely interested in their expertise, not just observing from a distance. Most executives never leave their offices, commented Sam Dober, a machine operator who had worked there for 12 years. Your mother was different. She knew everyone's name, remembered their kids' birthdays, made people feel like they mattered. That became my template. I made it my business to learn not just the operational details, but the human element that made the company function. I attended employee family picnics, visited workers who were hospitalized, and instituted an open-door policy that my mother had maintained. During my third month, Frances Lively requested a meeting to discuss potential projects. Lively Construction had submitted several bids for smaller contracts, each professionally prepared but revealing a company still building its reputation with larger clients. Francis himself was charming and ambitious, clearly hoping to establish Abernathy Industries as a major client. Ms. Abernathy, he said during our meeting, I want to be direct with you. Our company has grown steadily over the past 5 years, but we're ready to take on larger, more complex projects. We see Abernathy Industries as the kind of partnership that could elevate both our businesses. I appreciated his honesty. Francis was building something, just as my mother had built something decades earlier. His hunger for opportunity reminded me of the ambition Clark had claimed I lacked. What makes you confident you can handle projects at our scale? I asked. Experience with smaller clients has taught us to be meticulous about details and deadlines, Francis replied. We may not have the biggest portfolio yet, but we have the dedication and skill to exceed expectations. His daughter Catherine handled the technical presentations during our meetings. She was clearly competent, explaining project specifications with the confidence of someone who understood both the creative and practical aspects of construction. Her professionalism impressed me, even as I couldn't help wondering if this was the woman Clark found so superior to his bookstore-working ex-wife. I awarded Lively Construction a mid-sized office renovation contract, partly based on their competitive bid, and partly because I believed in giving ambitious companies the chance to prove themselves. Francis's gratitude was genuine and professional. You won't regret this decision, he promised. We'll deliver exceptional work. As Catherine gathered their presentation materials, she smiled warmly. Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Abernathy. We understand the trust you're placing in us. I found myself genuinely liking her, which complicated my feelings about Clark's new relationship. Catherine seemed intelligent and hardworking, qualities I respected regardless of her personal choices. The renovation project became my first major test as CEO. I insisted on regular progress meetings and detailed oversight, not because I doubted Lively Construction's abilities, but because I needed to learn how to manage complex vendor relationships. Catherine proved herself capable and responsive to feedback. When we requested design modifications, she adapted quickly while maintaining project timelines. When material costs fluctuated, she provided transparent explanations and alternative solutions. Your attention to detail is remarkable, I told her during one project review. It's clear you take pride in your work. My father taught me that reputation is built one project at a time, Catherine replied. We can't afford to disappoint clients, especially ones as important as Abernathy Industries. The project finished ahead of schedule and under budget. Francis delivered results that exceeded our expectations, and Catherine's project management had been exemplary throughout the process. I found myself respecting both their professional competence and their genuine commitment to quality work. But I also couldn't ignore the irony. The woman Clark had chosen for her family's wealth and connections was working hard to impress the ex-wife he'd dismissed as unambitious. Catherine was earning her success through skill and dedication, while Clark had simply attached himself to what he perceived as her advantages. 3 months after the renovation project's completion, I received an unexpected call from Clark's lawyer requesting a modification to our divorce settlement. He was struggling financially and wanted to reduce the small amount of spousal support he'd been ordered to pay. Mr. Thatcher claims his income has decreased significantly since the divorce, Peter explained. He's also requesting information about any assets you may have acquired, suggesting you might be concealing resources. The request was both pathetic and revealing. Clark had left me for someone else's money, but his own financial situation had apparently deteriorated while mine had improved beyond his imagination. Deny the modification, I instructed Peter, and provide only the minimum disclosure. Required. My bookstore salary from the time period. Covered by our marriage, Clark had no idea that his struggling ex-wife now controlled a business empire. That revelation would come in its own time, when it could have maximum impact on his understanding of the choices he'd made. Meanwhile, I continued building relationships within the business community, attending industry conferences and networking events. The skills I'd developed at the bookstore, listening to people's needs, finding solutions to problems, building trust through genuine care, translated surprisingly well to corporate leadership. I was becoming someone I'd never imagined I could be, not by changing my fundamental nature, but by discovering how my natural strengths could be applied in a larger context. The woman Clark had dismissed as lacking ambition was revealing capabilities that had always existed beneath his narrow expectations. 18 months into my tenure as CEO, Abernathy Industries had not only stabilized, but begun expanding in ways that honored my mother's vision, while reflecting my own leadership style. The company culture she'd built, treating employees as valuable partners rather than replaceable resources, had deepened under my guidance, resulting in higher productivity and lower turnover than our competitors experienced. I'd implemented several innovations suggested by employees during my factory floor visits, resulting in increased efficiency and higher morale. Our contracts were being renewed at favorable terms, and we'd secured 3 new major clients. Impressed by our combination of competitive pricing and exceptional service quality, Lively Construction had become one of our preferred contractors after their successful completion of multiple projects. Francis had proven himself reliable and creative, while Catherine had evolved into someone I genuinely respected professionally. Their company's growth paralleled our own expansion, creating a mutually beneficial partnership that strengthened both businesses. During this period, I developed friendships within the business community that provided both professional support and personal fulfillment. Chris Hutch, who ran a family manufacturing business similar to ours, became someone I could discuss industry challenges with. Someone who understood the pressures of building upon a family legacy while establishing your own leadership identity. It's refreshing to meet someone who sees business as more than just profit maximization, he said during one of our conversations at an industry conference. Too many people in our field treat workers like interchangeable parts. My mother taught me that people make businesses successful, not the other way around, I replied. Though I'm still learning how to balance that philosophy with practical realities, Chris laughed. If you figure out that balance, write a book. The rest of us have been working on it for decades. Our friendship remained strictly professional, but it provided me with insights into managing growth while maintaining company culture. Chris had faced similar challenges when expanding his family business, and his experiences helped me avoid common pitfalls. The personal cost of this professional growth was occasional loneliness. I worked long hours, spent weekends reviewing strategic plans, and had little social life outside business events. The financial security that had once seemed so important paled beside the satisfaction of building something meaningful. But it didn't entirely fill the emotional void left by my divorce. One evening, as I reviewed expansion proposals in my office, Luke knocked on my door carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're here past 9 again," he observed, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Your mother worked hard, but she also knew when to stop." "I'm still learning the balance," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping ahead of the decisions I need to make. That's because you're trying to prove something, Luke said gently. Margaret never felt the need to prove she belonged here. She just belonged. His observation struck deeper than he probably intended. I had been trying to prove something, to myself, to the employees who remembered my mother, and perhaps to Clark. Even though he remained unaware of my transformation, what would my mother have prioritized in my position? I asked. Strategic thinking over tactical management, he replied without hesitation. She trusted people to handle details while she focused on direction and relationships. I began delegating more operational responsibilities to department heads while concentrating on longer-term planning and partnership development. This shift allowed me to attend more industry events, join professional associations, and build connections that would benefit Abernathy Industries for years to come. During one such conference, I learned that Clark had changed jobs twice in the past year, apparently struggling to find positions that met his salary expectations. Industry contacts mentioned seeing him at networking events, though he seemed less confident than in previous years. Meanwhile, Catherine had expanded her role at Lively Construction, taking on larger projects and representing the company at industry functions. I'd seen her at several conferences where she conducted herself with increasing authority and expertise. Her professional growth was impressive, and I found myself wondering how Clark's financial struggles were affecting their relationship. The answer came during a chance encounter at a charity fundraiser for literacy programs. I'd committed to supporting the organization months earlier, drawn by its mission to provide books and educational resources to underserved communities, a cause that connected my current success with my former passion for literature. Catherine approached me during the networking portion of the evening, her professional smile warm but carrying an undercurrent of concern. Ms. Abernathy, she said, I wanted to thank you again for the partnership opportunities you've provided our company. The contracts with Abernathy Industries have been transformational for our growth. Your work has consistently exceeded expectations, I replied honestly. Success should be rewarded with continued opportunities. Catherine nodded, but seemed to be building courage for a different conversation. I also wanted to mention that I've recently ended a personal relationship that was complicating my focus on business development. I maintained my neutral expression while processing the implications. I'm sorry to hear about any personal difficulties. I hope the situation resolves positively for everyone involved. It already has, Catherine said with quiet confidence. Sometimes ending relationships that aren't serving your growth is the healthiest choice for everyone. Her words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. Catherine had apparently concluded that her relationship with Clark was hindering rather than helping her professional development. The irony was profound. The woman Clark had chosen for her, family's wealth and connections, had decided he was holding her back from achieving her own potential. That conversation marked a subtle shift in my perspective. Catherine wasn't just Clark's girlfriend who happened to run a successful business. She was a competent professional who had recognized that Clark's limitations were affecting her own trajectory. Her decision to prioritize her career over a relationship that wasn't contributing to her goals demonstrated exactly the kind of ambition Clark had claimed I lacked. 6 months later, I received an unexpected call that would set the stage for our final confrontation. Kelly Beaumont, a prominent figure in the local business community who ran a successful logistics company, was organizing the annual Metropolitan Business Awards Gala. Abernathy Industries had been nominated for Manufacturing Excellence, recognizing the growth and innovation we'd achieved under my leadership. Ms. Abernathy, Kelly said during our phone conversation, I wanted to personally invite you to attend the gala as our guest of honor. Your company's achievements this year have been remarkable, and the business community has taken notice. The invitation represented validation of everything I'd built since taking over my mother's company. But more than that, it would be my first major public appearance as the successful CEO I'd become, attended by the same business community where Clark had hoped to advance his own career through his relationship with Catherine. I'd be honored to attend, I told Kelly. Thank you for the recognition. As I hung up the phone, I realized the gala would likely be attended by both Catherine and Clark, since Lively Construction had become successful enough to participate in such high-profile industry events. The thought of seeing them together didn't distress me as it might have 2 years earlier. Instead, I felt curious about how the evening would unfold. The woman Clark had dismissed as unambitious was about to be publicly honored for business excellence, while his own career had apparently stagnated. The transformation that had begun with his departure was now complete, enough to withstand any comparison between the life he'd chosen and the one he'd rejected. I looked forward to the evening with quiet confidence, knowing that whatever happened, I would face it as someone who had discovered her own worth rather than someone seeking validation from others. Recognition. The invitation to the Metropolitan Business Awards Gala arrived 3 weeks before the event, printed on elegant cardstock that listed the evening's sponsors and honorary committee members. My breath caught when I saw Lively Construction, silver sponsor, among the supporting businesses. Catherine's company had grown enough to invest in high-profile industry events, which meant she would likely attend with significant visibility throughout the evening. I'd successfully avoided social situations where I might encounter Clark and Catherine together since learning about their relationship. Our business dealings with Lively Construction remained strictly professional, conducted through project managers and formal meetings. But this gala would be different. A public celebration of business achievement where personal and professional worlds would inevitably collide. You should definitely attend, Luke advised when I mentioned the invitation. Abernathy Industries deserves recognition for what you've accomplished. Your mother would have gone, and she would have been proud to see you honored. He was right. Under my leadership, we'd increased revenue by 42%, expanded into 3 new markets, and maintained our reputation for quality while growing our workforce by 30%. The company my mother had built was not just surviving, but thriving under my guidance. I purchased an evening gown for the occasion, something elegant but understated in deep navy blue. The woman in the dressing room mirror looked nothing like the defeated bookstore employee Clark had left behind. 2.5 years of executive responsibility had given me a bearing I hadn't possessed before. Confident without being arrogant, poised without being artificial. The gala was held at the Fairmont Hotel, its grand ballroom decorated with crystal chandeliers and arrangements of white orchids. I arrived alone, having declined Chris Hutch's offer to accompany me. Our friendship had remained strictly professional, and I wasn't ready to complicate it with social expectations that might alter our comfortable dynamic. The business community I'd joined through networking events welcomed me warmly. My reputation had grown alongside my company's success, and several executives approached me with genuine respect for what I'd achieved. The conversations were sophisticated and engaging, covering industry trends and economic forecasts rather than the superficial small talk I'd dreaded. I was discussing supply chain innovations with Kelly Beaumont when I spotted them across the room. Clark wore a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit properly, while Catherine was resplendent in a designer gown that suggested her company's recent success had improved her personal circumstances. They moved through the crowd, but their interaction seemed more professional than romantic. Catherine introducing Clark to various business leaders, with the courtesy one might show a colleague rather than the pride of presenting a beloved partner. Catherine was clearly in her element, gesturing toward the Lively Construction banners and explaining her company's projects to interested listeners. Clark nodded along appropriately, but his role seemed secondary to hers, more supporter than equal partner. The dynamic was telling. Catherine had become the primary figure in their relationship, both professionally and socially. They hadn't noticed me yet, but the evening was young. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and steeled myself for the inevitable encounter while continuing my conversation with Kelly about logistics challenges in manufacturing. Elise Abernathy? The voice belonged to Francis Lively, approaching with his usual confident smile, though tonight it carried additional warmth that spoke to his company's elevated status as event sponsors. I wanted to personally congratulate you on the nomination. Well-deserved recognition for what you've built. Thank you, Mr. Lively. Your company's growth has been impressive as well. The business community has certainly taken notice of your recent achievements. Frances beamed with entrepreneurial pride. Catherine has been instrumental in that growth. She's been handling our major client relationships and strategic partnerships. Remarkable head for business, that daughter of mine. I can see why. The quality of work and project management has been exceptional. Actually, Francis continued, lowering his voice with the conspiratorial tone of someone about to share significant news, Catherine made an important personal decision recently that's allowed her to focus more intensively on business development. Ended a relationship that was becoming a distraction from her professional goals. My stomach tightened slightly, but I maintained my composed expression. Personal focus can certainly impact professional performance. Exactly. The gentleman was nice enough, I suppose, but not quite the caliber Catherine deserves. An accountant from one of the mid-tier firms downtown. Decent fellow, but limited vision. If you know what I mean. Francis's casual dismissal revealed everything about how Clark had been perceived within Catherine's family circle. Catherine realized she needed someone who could match her ambitions, not hold them back. The irony was staggering. Clark had left me for lacking ambition, only to be discarded by Catherine for the exact same reason. The pattern revealed something fundamental about his character, his inability to recognize or nurture potential in others because he was too focused on attaching himself to existing success. I'm sure she'll find someone more suitable, I replied carefully. Francis nodded and moved on to greet other guests, leaving me to process what I'd learned. Catherine had ended her relationship with Clark, recognizing that his limitations were hindering her own growth. The timing was perfect from my perspective. She would attend tonight's gala as a successful businesswoman in her own right, while Clark's presence would be as her former boyfriend rather than her current partner. I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and engaging in conversations that would have intimidated me 3 years ago. My confidence wasn't performance anymore. It was genuine, earned through months of difficult decisions and successful outcomes. The award presentation began at 8 o'clock. I found myself seated at a table near the front, surrounded by other nominated executives and their guests. From my vantage point, I could see Catherine at a prominently placed sponsors table, but Clark was notably absent from her immediate vicinity. She sat with other business leaders, engaged in animated conversation about what appeared to be serious professional topics. When they announced the nominees for manufacturing excellence, my company's achievements were outlined in detail. Revenue growth, workforce expansion, successful facility modernization, strategic acquisition integration, and industry leadership in employee satisfaction. The description painted a picture of dynamic leadership and innovative thinking that honored my mother's foundation while establishing my own distinct contributions. The award goes to Abernathy Industries, led by CEO Elise Abernathy. Applause filled the ballroom as I rose to accept the recognition. Walking to the podium, I caught a glimpse of Catherine applauding enthusiastically, her professional respect for my achievements evident in her expression. Across the room, Clark stood with polite but reserved attention, his face showing the first signs of recognition that something significant was happening. At the podium, I delivered prepared remarks about teamwork, vision, and the responsibility that comes with business success. Leadership isn't about commanding from above, I concluded, but about recognizing potential in others and creating environments where that potential can flourish. The greatest success any business can achieve is enabling the people within it to become more than they thought possible. The speech was well received, establishing me as a thoughtful leader rather than someone who had simply inherited position. As I returned to my seat with the award, I noticed Clark's expression had shifted from casual interest to sharp attention. Something about my presence, my bearing, or perhaps the name Abernathy had triggered recognition, though he seemed to be struggling to connect the confident CEO he'd just watched with the unambitious ex-wife he remembered. The evening's networking portion began after the ceremony, with guests mingling over cocktails. I was engaged in a discussion about sustainable manufacturing practices when Catherine approached. Her smile warm and professional. "Ms. Abernathy," she said, extending her hand, "I wanted to personally congratulate you on the award. Your speech was inspiring, and your company's achievements this year have been remarkable. Thank you. That means a great deal coming from someone whose own professional growth has been so impressive." Catherine's smile deepened. "I appreciate that. This past year has been transformational for me professionally. Sometimes removing distractions from your life allows you to focus on what truly matters." Her choice of words was deliberate and telling. Clark had been a distraction rather than a partner who contributed to her success. The woman he'd chosen for her supposed advantages had ultimately found him to be an impediment to achieving her own potential. "Focus is essential for sustained growth," I agreed. "Both personally and professionally." "Exactly. I've learned that the people in your life should either contribute to your progress or, at minimum, not hinder it. Settling for less than that does a disservice to your own capabilities." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of someone I hadn't expected to see. Clark appeared beside Catherine, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes showing unmistakable recognition as he studied my face. "Catherine," he said, his voice carrying a slight tension, "I've been looking for you." "Clark," Catherine replied with the polite distance of someone maintaining courtesy toward a former romantic partner. "I'd like you to meet Elise Abernathy, CEO of Abernathy Industries. Ms. Abernathy, this is Clark Thatcher." The moment hung suspended as Catherine waited for our response, unaware of the significance of the introduction she'd just made. Clark stood frozen, clearly hoping I wouldn't reveal our connection while simultaneously dreading whatever I might say instead. "Actually," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, "Clark and I are already acquainted. We were married for 3 years. Catherine's expression underwent a fascinating transformation. Confusion, then shock, then a rapidly calculated reassessment of everything she thought she knew about both Clark and me. Her professional composure remained intact, but I could see her mind working through the implications of what I'd just revealed. "Married," she repeated slowly, her gaze shifting between us. "But you said your ex-wife was a nobody who worked in a bookstore with no ambition?" I finished helpfully. "Yes, I remember that conversation." The color had completely drained from Clark's face. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time, faced with undeniable evidence that his judgment had been catastrophically flawed. Catherine's business acumen allowed her to quickly grasp the situation's full complexity. "You're the ex-wife who supposedly lacked ambition," she said to me, her tone carefully neutral as she processed the massive disconnect between Clark's description and the successful CEO standing before her. The very same. Though, as you can see, rumors of my mediocrity were greatly exaggerated. The conversation continued for another few minutes with painful politeness, but the damage was done. Catherine excused herself to attend to her sponsorship duties, leaving Clark and me alone for the first time since our divorce. "Elise," Clark began, his voice carrying a strain I'd never heard before, "I had no idea you were this." He gestured vaguely toward my award and the elegant surroundings. "Of course you didn't," I replied evenly. "You never bothered to learn who I actually was." Clark's attempt at casual conversation felt forced and desperate. "You looked successful. How did this happen?" "The bookstore, I mean. I discovered that my potential wasn't limited by your opinion of it." I kept my tone neutral, professional. "Sometimes the most important growth happens after people who can't see your worth remove themselves from your life." The weeks following, the gala brought a series of developments that accelerated the unraveling of Clark's carefully constructed world. Catherine had apparently spent considerable time reflecting on our encounter, because she called my office requesting a private meeting that had nothing to do with construction contracts. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, where Catherine's directness surprised me once again. "I need to understand something," she began without preamble. Clark described his ex-wife as someone content with mediocrity, lacking in ambition, satisfied with a small life. But you've built something remarkable. Either he was deliberately misleading me, or his judgment is so poor that he completely misunderstood someone he lived with for 3 years. What does your instinct tell you? I asked. Catherine considered the question seriously. That someone who could so fundamentally misjudge their own wife's capabilities probably can't be trusted to accurately assess much of anything else. Her conclusion was both logical and devastating for Clark. If he'd been that wrong about me, what did that say about his professional opinions, his business instincts, or his ability to evaluate opportunities and risks? I appreciate your directness, I told her. It's refreshing to meet someone who values accuracy over comfortable illusions. My father taught me that successful businesses are built on accurate assessments of people and situations, Catherine replied. Misjudging someone's potential, the way Clark misjudged yours, isn't just a personal failure, it's a professional liability. Our conversation revealed that Catherine had already been questioning other aspects of Clark's character, his financial struggles, his inability to advance in his career despite his proclaimed ambitions, his tendency to blame external circumstances for his lack of progress. Learning about his massive misreading of my capabilities had apparently been the final piece of evidence she needed to make a definitive judgment about their relationship's viability. I ended things with him last week, Catherine informed me matter-of-factly. I realized I was trying to help someone who couldn't recognize potential even when he was married to it. That doesn't suggest someone capable of building anything meaningful. Meanwhile, Clark had apparently been conducting his own investigation into my transformation. Peter Dober called to inform me that Clark's attorney had made inquiries about my assets, clearly struggling to understand how his ex-wife had become wealthy enough to attend exclusive business galas and win industry awards. Mr. Thatcher seems confused about your current financial status, Peter noted with dry amusement. His lawyer requested clarification about the source of your apparent prosperity. And your response? That any assets acquired after the divorce are beyond the scope of our original settlement. I may have also mentioned that successful people often build wealth through vision and hard work rather than divorce proceedings. Clark's desperation became more evident through mutual acquaintances in the business community. He'd apparently been attending networking events with increased frequency, trying to rebuild professional connections that might lead to better opportunities. But his association with Catherine's family business had ended with their relationship, leaving him without the influential contacts he'd hoped to cultivate. Chris Hutch mentioned seeing Clark at a recent industry mixer, describing him as seeming somewhat adrift, professionally speaking. The man who had left me for a better future was apparently struggling to create that future, now that his primary strategy, attaching himself to someone else's success, had failed. The irony deepened when I learned that Lively Construction had won a major contract with one of our competitors, partly based on Catherine's reputation for excellence in project management. Her professional success was accelerating just as Clark's prospects were declining, creating an even sharper contrast between his choices and their consequences. During this period, I found myself feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy for Clark's difficulties. His struggles were the natural result of his approach to life, seeking shortcuts to success rather than building capabilities, judging others by narrow criteria that reflected his own limitations rather than their actual potential. I was more interested in the broader lessons his situation illustrated about the importance of recognizing and nurturing talent rather than dismissing it. In my role at Abernathy Industries, I'd made it a priority to identify employees whose contributions might be overlooked by traditional management approaches, often finding remarkable capabilities in unexpected places. Sam Dober, the machine operator who had taught me about factory operations during my early days, had suggested several process improvements that increased efficiency by 15%. Sarah Dober, his daughter, had earned her engineering degree and joined our design team, where her fresh perspective was already contributing to innovative solutions. The pattern was clear. Potential existed everywhere, but it required leaders willing to look beyond surface appearances and conventional expectations. 3 months after the gala, I received an invitation that would provide the perfect opportunity for a final demonstration of how dramatically circumstances had changed. Kelly Beaumont was organizing a special networking dinner for the region's most successful manufacturers, with attendance limited to CEOs whose companies had achieved exceptional growth in recent years. The invitation specifically mentioned that Abernathy Industries' achievements had earned me a place among the region's most visionary business leaders. The event would be intimate, high-profile, and exactly the kind of gathering where Clark had once hoped to advance his career through his association with Catherine's family. Catherine would certainly be invited based on Lively Construction's recent success. Clark, having lost both his romantic connection to Catherine and any professional standing that might warrant inclusion, would likely learn about the event only through industry reports or social media coverage. I accepted the invitation, recognizing it as an opportunity to demonstrate not just my professional success, but the philosophical approach that had made that success sustainable. The evening would showcase leaders who had built something meaningful, rather than simply positioning themselves near others' achievements. I prepared for what would likely be the final chapter in my unlikely transformation from dismissed wife to recognized business leader. I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. Clark's departure had initially felt like devastating rejection, but it had actually been liberation from limitations I'd never recognized I was accepting. The woman he'd dismissed as unambitious had always possessed the capability to achieve remarkable things. She'd simply needed the right circumstances and the absence of someone constantly diminishing her potential to discover what she was truly capable of building. The exclusive manufacturers' dinner was held at the city's most prestigious private club, a venue that embodied the kind of success Clark had always aspired to access. The invitation had been extended to only 25 CEOs whose companies represented the pinnacle of regional business achievement. As I entered the elegant dining room, I realized I was among the youngest attendees, and one of only 4 women, a testament to both the exclusivity of the gathering and the rarity of my rapid ascent in the industry. Kelly Beaumont greeted me warmly as I arrived. "Elise, I'm so pleased you could join us tonight. Your company's transformation over the past 3 years has been remarkable. Everyone here is eager to hear about your approach to sustainable growth." The conversation throughout the cocktail hour was sophisticated and substantive, covering market trends, technological innovations, and the challenges of maintaining company culture during rapid expansion. I found myself contributing insights that were well received and genuinely valued by executives with decades more experience than I possessed. Catherine arrived 20 minutes after me, looking confident and polished in a way that spoke to her company's elevated status. She moved through the room with the easy authority of someone who belonged in such settings, greeting several other attendees with the familiarity of established business relationships. When she approached me, her smile was genuine and professional. "Ms. Abernathy, I should have expected to see you here. This gathering represents exactly the kind of visionary leadership Lively Construction aspires to work with. Your company's recent growth certainly warrants inclusion in these discussions," I replied. "Your project management innovations have set new standards in the industry." "Thank you. That recognition means a great deal coming from someone whose own leadership has been so transformational." Catherine paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I wanted you to know that ending my relationship with Clark was one of the best decisions I've made for my professional development. Removing that particular distraction allowed me to focus entirely on building something meaningful." Her candor was both refreshing and revealing. Catherine had recognized that Clark's presence in her life was hindering rather than advancing her goals. A conclusion that validated every instinct I'd had about his character during our marriage. Sometimes, the most important choices we make involve recognizing what doesn't serve our growth, I agreed. Personal and professional success often require similar clarity about priorities. The dinner itself was structured around presentations from several attendees about innovative approaches to business challenges. When Kelly invited me to speak about leadership through human capital development, I shared insights from my experience building Abernathy Industries into a model for employee engagement, and sustainable growth. The most valuable resource any company possesses is the unrealized potential of its workforce, I told the assembled executives. Traditional management often focuses on extracting productivity from people rather than investing in their capabilities. But when you create environments where individuals can exceed their own expectations, the results benefit everyone involved. I described specific examples: Sam Dober's process improvements, Sarah's engineering innovations, and the cultural changes that had resulted in industry-leading employee retention. The audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions about implementation strategies and measurement techniques. During the question period, one executive asked, "What inspired this human-centered approach to leadership?" It's relatively uncommon in manufacturing. Personal experience taught me that people's potential is often invisible to those who don't take time to truly see them, I replied. I learned that the most dangerous mistake a leader can make is underestimating the capabilities of the people around them. When you make that error, you not only limit others, you limit your own possibilities for growth. The response was thoughtful nods and murmurs of agreement. Several executives approached me afterward to continue the conversation, clearly interested in adapting similar approaches within their own organizations. As the evening concluded, Catherine made a point of speaking with me privately once more. "Your presentation was inspiring," she said. "But I suspect it was also personal. Someone underestimated you significantly, didn't they?" "Someone did," I confirmed. "But that experience taught me to never make the same mistake with others. Sometimes our greatest setbacks become our most valuable lessons about recognizing potential." Catherine nodded with understanding. Clark's inability to see your capabilities wasn't just his loss. It was a fundamental failure of judgment that affected every aspect of his decision-making. I'm grateful I recognized that before it limited my own potential. The following week brought news that completed the transformation of our respective circumstances. Clark had been terminated from his position at the accounting firm, reportedly due to performance issues and lack of client development. Meanwhile, Catherine had been featured in the Business Journal as one of the region's rising stars in construction, with Lively Construction projected to double its revenue within 2 years. The contrast was stark. Clark's career was declining just as Catherine's was accelerating, demonstrating that the qualities he'd claimed to value, ambition, vision, success, were precisely what he lacked himself. His pattern of seeking advancement through association rather than accomplishment had finally caught up with him. I felt no satisfaction in Clark's professional struggles, but I did feel vindicated in my assessment of his character. The man who had dismissed my potential while claiming to understand success had proven himself incapable of creating the opportunities he'd sought. His failure wasn't circumstantial, it was fundamental, rooted in an approach to life that prioritized positioning over building. Peter Dober called with an update that added a final layer of irony to the situation. "Mr. Thatcher's attorney contacted us again," he reported. "Apparently, he's facing significant financial difficulties and wondered if you might consider providing temporary assistance based on your current prosperity." The request was breathtaking in its presumption. The man who had left me because I supposedly lacked ambition was now asking for help from the success he'd been too narrow-minded to recognize. His desperation had reached the point where he was willing to admit his error in judgment, but only as a strategy for accessing the wealth he'd failed to create himself. "What was your response?" I asked. "That any financial assistance would be inappropriate given the circumstances of your divorce, and that Mr. Thatcher might benefit more from career counseling than from monetary support." That evening, I hosted a small celebration dinner for the Abernathy Industries management team, recognizing their contributions to our recent industry recognition. Luke, Sam, Sarah, and several other key employees gathered at an excellent restaurant to mark our collective achievement. "To Elise," Luke proposed during his toast, "for showing us that the best leaders don't just manage people, they help them discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed." The sentiment was echoed around the table, with various team members sharing examples of how our company culture had enabled them to contribute beyond their traditional roles. Sarah mentioned that her engineering innovations had been encouraged from her first day, despite her lack of experience. Sam noted that his process improvement suggestions had been implemented immediately rather than dismissed as inappropriate for someone in his position. The most remarkable thing about working here, added Meredith, my assistant, is feeling like your ideas matter regardless of your job title. It makes everyone want to contribute their best thinking. As I listened to their comments, I realized that my approach to leadership had been shaped entirely by my experience of being underestimated. Clark's inability to see my potential had taught me the importance of recognizing capabilities that others might overlook. His dismissive attitude had shown me how destructive it was to limit people based on narrow categories rather than genuine assessment of their strengths. The transformation that had begun with personal devastation had evolved into a professional philosophy that was benefiting dozens of people and creating sustainable value for our company. Clark's departure had been the catalyst for discovering not just my own potential, but an approach to leadership that honored the potential in others. After dinner, I drove past the apartment building where I'd lived during those first difficult months after our divorce. The building looked smaller than I remembered, less significant in the context of everything that had followed. The woman who had lived there, devastated by abandonment and convinced she lacked worth, had discovered strengths that exceeded her own expectations. The vindication was complete, but it belonged entirely to me, rather than being defined by Clark's recognition of his error. I'd proven to myself that the dismissal I'd internalized was false, that the potential he'd failed to see was real and valuable. His acknowledgement of that mistake was irrelevant to the worth I'd discovered and the life I'd built from it. The woman Clark had left behind was indeed gone, replaced by someone who understood that true success comes from recognizing and nurturing potential rather than seeking shortcuts through association with others' achievements. His departure had been devastating at the time, but it had ultimately been the greatest gift he could have, given me the freedom to discover who I truly was when not constrained by someone else's limited vision of my capabilities. 6 months after the manufacturer's dinner, I stood in my corner office overlooking the city, reading the morning business report that featured Abernathy Industries' acquisition of 2 smaller companies, a strategic expansion that would create hundreds of new jobs and establish us as the region's largest independent manufacturer. The growth had been organic and sustainable, built on the foundation my mother had established and the culture of potential recognition I'd developed. The acquisition announcement had made the front page of the business section, complete with a photograph of me signing the documents and a sidebar article about my leadership philosophy. The coverage was respectful and substantive, focusing on our employee-centered approach and commitment to community investment, rather than treating my success as an anomaly worthy of special attention. A knock on my door interrupted my reading. Meredith entered with her usual efficient smile, carrying a folder of correspondence and a bemused expression. "You have an unusual request in today's mail," she said, placing a handwritten letter on my desk. "Someone asking for a meeting about mutual opportunities for collaboration. The signature is interesting." I recognized Clark's handwriting before I read his name. The letter was carefully worded, avoiding direct reference to our personal history, while suggesting that his experience with Abernathy Industries' operational excellence qualified him to contribute to our continued growth. He was apparently seeking employment, though the letter was crafted to sound like a peer offering partnership rather than a desperate job application. "How would you like me to respond?" Meredith asked, clearly understanding the situation's delicate nature. "Standard form letter declining the proposal," I replied without hesitation. "Include information about our official hiring process if he's interested in pursuing employment through appropriate channels." Meredith nodded and departed, leaving me to reflect on how completely our positions had reversed. Clark had once told me I lacked ambition. Now he was seeking opportunities within the company I'd built. He had dismissed my potential. Now he was hoping to benefit from the success that potential had created. But my decision to decline his overture wasn't motivated by revenge or spite. It was based on the same principle that guided all my hiring decisions: cultural fit, and demonstrated capability. Clark had shown himself incapable of recognizing potential in others, unable to build sustainable success through his own efforts, and prone to abandoning commitments when they became challenging. Those characteristics made him unsuitable for our organization regardless of our personal history. Later that morning, I attended the groundbreaking ceremony for a new community training center that Abernathy Industries was funding in partnership with local educational organizations. The facility would provide job skills training and entrepreneurship, resources for people seeking to improve their economic circumstances, the kind of initiative my mother would have supported and that aligned with my philosophy about nurturing potential, wherever it existed. During the ceremony, I was approached by Catherine, who had been invited as a representative of the construction companies collaborating on the project. Lively Construction had grown significantly since our first meeting, and Catherine's reputation for excellence had made her company a preferred partner for many community development initiatives. "Ms. Abernathy," she said warmly, "I wanted to congratulate you on the recent acquisitions. The industry is taking notice of how you've managed to grow rapidly while maintaining the culture that makes Abernathy Industries special. Thank you. Your company's work on this facility has been exceptional as well. It's gratifying to work with partners who share similar values about community investment." Catherine smiled. "I've learned a great deal from observing your approach to business development. The way you recognize potential in both people and opportunities has become a model for how I try to operate my own company. The best compliment any leader can receive is knowing their approach has influenced others." "Positively," I replied. "Your success demonstrates that these principles work across different industries and company sizes." As the ceremony concluded, Catherine mentioned something that provided closure to a chapter I'd thought was already finished. "I heard that Clark has been struggling professionally since we ended our relationship. Several people mentioned seeing him at networking events, apparently seeking new opportunities." "I hope he finds something suitable," I said diplomatically. "I do too, though I suspect his challenges are more fundamental than situational. Someone who could so completely misjudge their own wife's potential probably faces similar blind spots in other areas." Catherine paused thoughtfully. "I'm grateful that relationship ended when it did. It freed me to focus on building something meaningful rather than trying to help someone who couldn't recognize value when it was right in front of him." Her words echoed my own experience exactly. Clark's inability to see potential, whether in me, in business opportunities, or in his own capacity for growth, had been a fundamental limitation that affected every aspect of his approach to life. Catherine had recognized that limitation and removed herself from its influence, just as I had been forced to do through his departure. That evening, I attended a charity gala supporting literacy programs in underserved communities. The cause connected my current success with my former passion for books and reading, representing the full circle of my journey from bookstore employee to business leader. During the silent auction, I bid successfully on a collection of first edition novels that I planned to donate to the new community training center's library. Chris Hutch approached me during the networking portion of the evening, his usual warm smile carrying additional respect that spoke to our evolving professional relationship. "I've been following the coverage of your recent acquisitions," he said. "Impressive strategic thinking. You're building something that will have lasting impact well beyond financial returns." "That was always my mother's vision," I replied. "She understood that sustainable businesses contribute to their communities rather than simply extracting value from them." "It's a philosophy more leaders should embrace," Chris agreed. "Speaking of which, I heard through industry channels that your ex-husband has been seeking opportunities with several manufacturers in the region. Apparently, his financial situation has become quite difficult." The information didn't surprise me, though I felt no satisfaction in hearing it confirmed. Clark's struggles were the predictable result of his approach to life and career, seeking advancement through association rather than building capabilities, abandoning commitments when they required sustained effort, and fundamentally misunderstanding what created lasting success. "I hope he finds a situation that suits his skills," I said honestly. Everyone deserves the opportunity to contribute meaningfully, even if it takes time to discover where they fit best. Chris nodded approvingly. That's a generous perspective, especially considering how he treated you during your marriage. Not everyone would be so gracious about their ex-spouse's difficulties. Holding on to resentment would only limit my own growth, I replied. The best revenge, if you want to call it that, is building a life so fulfilling that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. Later that evening, as I drove home through the city streets, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed since that devastating day when Clark announced his departure. The woman who had felt crushed by his rejection had discovered strength she'd never imagined possessing. The potential he'd failed to recognize had flourished into achievements that exceeded even my own revised expectations. But more than external success, I'd gained something more valuable, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. Clark's opinion of my capabilities had once carried weight because I hadn't developed confidence in my own judgment. His departure had forced me to discover what I was capable of when not constrained by someone else's limited vision of my potential. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. It had required months of struggle, years of learning, and the willingness to risk failure in pursuit of growth. But each challenge had revealed additional strengths. Each success had built greater confidence, and each recognition had confirmed that my potential had always existed. It had simply needed the right circumstances to emerge. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed the contrast between my current home and the modest apartment where this journey had begun. The house was larger and more elegant, certainly, but the real difference was internal. The woman living here knew her own worth, recognized her capabilities, and understood that her value didn't depend on anyone else's recognition or approval. Clark had done me the greatest possible favor by leaving when he did. His departure had removed the primary obstacle to discovering who I truly was beneath the limitations I'd accepted. The woman he'd dismissed as unambitious had always possessed the strength to build something meaningful. She'd simply needed the freedom to explore that potential without constantly defending its existence. His judgment had been wrong about everything that mattered. My capabilities, my potential, my worth, all had been present during our marriage, waiting for the right circumstances to be revealed. His inability to see those qualities said nothing about their reality and everything about his limitations as a judge of character and potential. The vindication was complete, but it belonged entirely to me. I'd proven to myself that the dismissal I'd internalized was false, that the dreams he'd called small were actually the foundation for achievements he'd never imagined possible. His recognition of his error would have been meaningless compared to the recognition I'd gained of my own capabilities. Some broken things, I'd learned, aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to become something entirely new and infinitely more beautiful than what came before. The marriage that had shattered under the weight of mismatched dreams had become the fertile ground where my actual self could finally take root and flourish. Clark's departure had been devastating at the time, but it had ultimately been liberation from limitations I'd never recognized I was accepting. The woman he'd left behind was indeed gone, replaced by someone who understood that true success comes from recognizing and nurturing potential rather than seeking validation from others' narrow expectations. The transformation was complete. The future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities that no one else would ever again be allowed to define or diminish. I had become exactly who I was meant to be, and no one could ever take that knowledge away from me again. Ready for more? If this episode resonated with you, these next ones are absolute must-watches. Simply click the subscribe button.